I am a Schnezaya diplomat. You know what happens if you lay a finger on me. I swear, if you strike me, I will make sure. Stop! I order you! And you! Filthy rats! All of you!
Genshin Impact might be the first gacha game to really hit the mainstream. Obviously, there have been other gachas that have had pretty long tenors and avid fan bases, such as Fate Grand Order, Arknights, and even Moheyo's previous game, Honkai Impact III, but I really think that Genshin Impact was the first one to transcend what was previously considered a mobile game genre and kind of establish itself in gaming culture. Now, as with everything, Genshin has its fair share of admirers and, well, disdainers, but here on this channel we explore characters and storylines, and Genshin has plenty of great choices for both. No matter what your opinions are on gachas as a whole, trust me, I know how grindy and wall and heavy they can be, or about the fandom itself, we like to remain objective here. Genshin has a great story, plenty of world building, characters that pop up out of everywhere, and still a large looming mystery even after 5 to 6 years of being out. And a benefit of that is being able to run your own campaign in this setting and put your own spin on things. So let's dive right into making your own Genshin Impact campaign. First of all, obviously, Genshin Impact won the poll, so that means that Avowed and Tales will show up on the next poll and Lost Odyssey will be dropped. But between you and me, I just think that A, we've never even heard of Lost Odyssey and missing out on one of the best RPGs of all time, or B, have really bad taste, and that is my completely objective opinion, I swear. I mean, how can you hate this?
Hey, we gotta get through that? There's no road!
Pull yourself together. If this is all it takes to wear you out, we're in trouble.
Yeah, well, I don't wear out in bed.
Anyways, that's just the way of the people, and we'll put that aside for now. But if you didn't vote just because you didn't know what it is, please check it out. It's one of my favorite things ever. As always, we have to take a look at a few things that make this world unique and separate from just a typical fantasy setting. So today we'll be looking over the regions, and as we do, we'll address each of the following: elements, visions and archons, factions, and lastly, maybe touch upon enemies and monsters. There are so many different monsters, each region has unique stuff, but there's entirely too many, and I don't really think you want to have literally everything from the game. I think there are plenty of things from the monster manual or the other books you could easily throw in, and we do have stat blocks for a lot of the monsters, but nowhere near the amount in the game. Honestly, I've been debating about whether I have enough knowledge right now to completely do this video, and I'm sitting in the middle of the Phoenix Wright portion of the game in Fontaine, and outside of some personal research and watching through cutscenes, I'm missing some of the more recent nuances, and this game loves to slide little tidbits and secrets when you're not looking. So, just give me a quick second to go finish that. Okay, so after like 22 hours of gameplay, I think I'm all caught up. Honestly, the story was never what got me to drop the game. I mean, I just put in 22 hours over 3 days, and that was just straight main quests. There are tons of other quests to do and things to collect, and I do recommend that if you're not into the gacha thing, just putting the story on focus mode and going through it. I mean, even what I hadn't experienced was still so good, and I'm just going to say that the captain is a real Chad. But even doing that, there are so many slight things that I'm sure I'll miss a ton of things here, but again, as always, it's more about getting the general overall picture than getting every piece of lore absolutely correct. So let's get into the nuances of this. The first place we're introduced to is Monstat, the land of freedom. Monstat has often a lot of green grass, stretching fields, and overall has a feel of a mostly peaceful countryside. There could be large gaps between things. The region-named city is pretty close to its only other settlement, Springvale, and for the most part there are some ruins here or there outside of the major plot-heavy areas. A big part of Genshin Impact is its ties to the elements, and it has a few ways to express that connection. Each region is connected to an element, mostly through its representing archon, which is basically like it's a ruler or god whose beliefs tend to influence the culture of the people living there. Monstat follows Barbados, the god of Anemo, or wind, and its philosophy of freedom, much like the wind, kinda means that Monstat is free to do as it pleases. The Church of Favonius does worship the Animal Archon, but unlike really any other of the nations, Barbados doesn't interfere or even show himself to any of the inhabitants, at least as far as they are aware. Masquerading as a drunken bard named Venti, he mostly spends his time playing music and frolicking with his people, no one the wiser to who he actually is. This will be a bit of a rant here, but visions are like gifted artifacts born from the aspirations that either embody the spirit and will of their Archon or of the nation, and those things can be relatively different. It was originally assumed that the Archon chose who got a vision based on their element, but as we found out in Inazuma, the Archon specifically mentioned that she doesn't control who does or doesn't get a vision, and also with Farina, the divine seat of the Hydra Archon was broken, but Nouvelet operates outside of the heavenly principles, and his level 6 friendship specifically states that he set aside some of his power for future Hydrovision users. So we can safely say that the Archons don't directly influence who receives a vision, however, I do believe that it is more than whatever was programmed into the heavenly principles, in that I think there are some things that are easier to attribute to the Archon themselves than the philosophy of the nation. Such as Barbara, a Monstat native, deaconess of the Church of Favonius, who actively worships Barbados, the god of Animo, and has a Hydrovision, which is supposed to in some way embody the will of justice. It has been alluded to that there are at least a few factors into why someone gets a vision, and at least my thought is that Barbara didn't receive hers for embodying the will of Fontaine, but embodying the characteristics of its Archon. Farina, an extension of Focalors, was all about the performance and spectacle for the people, and despite being a lady of the church, Barbara is an aspiring idol, i.e. someone who is all about the performance and the spectacle for the people. I think other people fit this ideal a bit better as well, such as Bennett, who isn't about war and fighting, however he embodies the will to keep persevering no matter what luck may befall him. And the point of all this is the way I look at the setting personally and interpret its rules, which if you want to use as plot points, or at least as guidelines for your campaign, matter quite a bit. With all of the answers still, we are left to interpret exactly how some of the nuances will work, and my interpretation and yours might be quite different, which obviously is perfectly okay, but can change certain things about the campaign. I'd assume that your player characters are going to have visions, and their backstory and how they achieve those visions will vary, so having less defined rules, or at least more interpretations of them, will do them and the campaign many favors. Back to specifically the visions for Monstat, I think pursuit of freedom or embodiment is pretty simple here. Usually forgoing your past and pursuing a new path, overcoming great loss, and just fighting for freedom in general seem to be key factors in receiving an Animo vision. I could take even more time to specifically look at each character's backstory, and by all means please feel free to tell me your takes and any extra lore you want to dump in the comments, especially if I get anything wrong. But we're going to try not to go on as long as the rant as I just did and focus on the campaign bits. Factions are important to your campaign, because often they're a group of people with particular ideals as a whole, and usually in some position of power, so your characters will have to follow their rules and mostly respect their beliefs. Monstat to me is yet again a bit unique from every other nation, because I feel like there are really only two important factions specific to it. That freedom to do whatever has a lot of various people mostly following what their hearts believe in, and that mostly means not following anything as a group. The main faction is the Knights of Favonius. They are the main governing factor for Monstat and are focused on everything that keeps things peaceful and free for Monstat. Its guildmaster works tirelessly making sure problems are taken care of even before they become problems. Everything they do for the people of Monstat, and besides for making sure that there are rules and guidelines to follow, there really isn't much more to them other than a helpful policeful force. The only other group I'd say is an important faction is the Adventurers Guild. Now, every nation has a branch of the Adventurers Guild, but for Monstat I feel like it's more relevant, or at least more integrated into its culture than in other nations. Most of the people who aren't in the Knights do small jobs for the Adventurers Guild as a way to make funds or just help out in some way. Other branches more so embody the essence of adventuring, finding vast treasures, and exploring ruins, and those certainly exist in Monstat, but it also seems like a hub for more casual work, such as making deliveries, clearing out small camps and things that the other natives of Monstat participate in to make a living without dedicating themselves to being full-blown adventurers. Now, before we get to the next nation, there are a handful of factions that kind of exist in each of the 7 nations. As I mentioned before, the Adventurers Guild does have a branch in each nation, and that'll actually be an important part of my idea for a campaign. There are also the Treasure Hoarders, the Fatui, and the Abyss. The treasure hoarders are pretty much akin to your usual bandits. They'll do anything they can to make a quick buck and have a hand in all kinds of illegal trade, including, well, a lot of not so savory stuff. A lot of themes can get pretty dark if you look too closely, so don't worry about it if the campaign feels a little too lighthearted for an idea you may have. Trust me, it'll fit right in. The Abyss is a group that fights against the order and natural life of Teyvat as a whole. Sometimes it acts autonomously, and sometimes there are specific groups and more cognizant entities within it. They are a major plot point of the story itself, but outside of the specific instance, they mostly seem to be corruption itself, not necessarily evil, but much like a poison or natural disaster, the Abyss exists to corrupt. If you need something where things are weird or suddenly extremely dangerous, the Abyss is a good tool to use. They are often doing weird experiments and trying to create powerful artifacts to in any way mess with the natural order of things. Lastly are the Fatui, who exist mostly as the primary faction in Schnezaya, but have spread throughout Teyvat to enact the will of the Cryo-Archon, the Tsaritsa. The Tsaritsa herself has permitted the Fatui to pursue their own means to follow her orders and pay tribute to her, which can result in extremely different interactions with each group of them. Their motives mostly are masked behind just saying they're enacting her will, so it can be very difficult to figure out what they're planning and whether it's, let's say, above board. When you're free to do what you want in the name of someone else, well, people seem to be extremely more happy to cross moral or questionable boundaries. So most people tend to be weary of them, especially if they've had any previous interactions with them. That being said, especially if you're caught up just like I did, there certainly are Fatui members who are more honorable and don't try to break as many laws as possible. So every interaction with the Fatui should leave the party wondering exactly what to expect. And even regular members that aren't the Harbingers, i.e. the supergroup of incredibly powerful members whose powers can rival or even surpass the Archons, but even the regular members have access to elemental energies even without visions and can be incredibly tough, so the Fatui shouldn't ever be taken lightly. I think we've covered enough for Monstat and everyone that should kind of exist in each nation, so we can finally move on to the next land. Next we have Leeway, the land of Geo, or Earth, and the land of contracts. This area is quite large and mountainous, full of many more ruins hidden in valleys, lakes, and rivers all around. The area inhabits a lot of Chinese culture, given the style of structures and dress, and much like Monstat, its namesake city is by far the largest settlement, with a few smaller villages here or there. The harbor of Leeway is home to some of the largest trade in the world of Teyvat, and theoretically has access to every nation through sea, though the map is kinda weird with its borders, and who knows what else lies in the areas that aren't marked. Deals and agreements are paramount to the nation, and following through on those is frankly absolutely necessary, because to go back or break an agreement is a serious affront in this nation. This land is also known for the Adepti, or for lack of a better term, mythical creatures and beings. They have special properties and abilities. Stemming from their Archon, Rex Lapis, they are under contract to protect Leeway from any danger and have been watching over it for thousands of years. Some are pure and prefer to stay in their bestial forms, such as a large bird or deer, and some only have some blood of the illuminated beast, which gives them the aforementioned features, but appearing mostly human. They are often worshipped or regaled in the same fashion as other gods and are respected as such. They sort of have a domain over certain sections of Leeway and can even make their own domains or subspace areas that exist outside of reality. They also have their own magics, which can do any number of things, and it's suggested that their attunement with the elements means that they operate with some sort of inner eye without need for a physical vision. However, this is seemingly only true of the Full-Bloods, where characters like Yanfei and Ganyu, who are only part Adepti, had to attain their visions the regular way. I would use these types of characters to really add areas into the region, or special rules and circumstances. I mean, in the game there must be at least a half dozen instances where you have to enter some sort of alternate area created by an Adepti. Their magic can also be too much for a human to bear, and there are even characters who have worked or studied under them, so they should be involved in some way in Leeway. The Archon, known again as Rex Lapis, or Morax, has taken a step back and faked his own death. He's allowed the humans of Leeway to protect their lands themselves, with the Adepti keeping watch just in case. Now going by Zhongli, he is often seen as a wise consultant, but often very poor, which is ironic considering he's responsible for inventing Teyvat's currency. Getting a geovision seems to not only be following contracts, but in holding an oath or ideal. Ningguang oversees the nation and considers it her duty to protect it. Ito has his commitment to his gang, Albedo to his creator and his sister, and Navia to the group her father left behind. As long as you have a duty to uphold and won't do anything to go back against that, that's what embodies the will of Leeway. The only faction really in Leeway of importance is the Leeway Qixing, and by extension the Millelith. The Millelith serve as a military under the Leeway Qixing and can be mobilized as an army, stationed as guards, or even go undercover in enemy ranks. Technically speaking, the Leeway Qixing is a group of 7 individuals of equal power who excel in their particular trade far above the rest. Offices can change when members become too old of age or appoint a successor, but regardless, these 7 are considered pioneers of their trade. As mentioned, they're all supposed to have the same level of influence and power, but often Ningguang is at the forefront of decisions, and even the Yuhang, Keqing, seems to report to her in some way. With Rex Lapis stepping back, it's possible she just chose to become a visible face for the people of Leeway, where a lot of the rest of the Qixing prefer to operate more under the radar. Anything that needs to be done, any questions to be asked and answered, anything at all that would require some sort of approval goes through the Leeway Qixing, mostly in triplicate forms. This is a bit of a long-winded video, and before we get through the rest of the nations, I wanted to talk about this video's sponsor, Describe. Describe has so many things going for it, and thanks to our current partnership, we're going over each aspect of Describe that makes it one of the most amazing tools to use for your D&D campaign. Today we're going over sound effects and ambiance. Every time I do one of these campaign videos, I always have a little snippet at the end that sort of sets up the opening plot hook for the campaign I'm making. I want to help paint a better picture for the audience and really bring them into the story, have them visualize that they're there, and this is something they can really get into. Describe has so many background noises like blowing wind, or sounds of the city, or waves lapping on the shore, or really anything that you could think of that would make your players feel like they're there. Is the party in the middle of a massive battle and you want to hear the sound of swords clashing in the background? Done. Sound of crunching leaves as the party walks through the forest? Easy. Do you want the sound of the last cries of an adult dragon before your party sends it to the next life? Not a problem. With tons and tons of sound and background music for almost anything you can think of, even sounds particular spells make when you cast them, Describe is the place to get all of that, and to add in that extra something special to your campaign. And to top it all off, the DM can create a room that anybody can join as a guest, so that using those sounds in online games is as easy as possible. And if there's something you can't find, their Celestial subscription lets you make requests so something can be made custom for you. If that doesn't sound amazing to you, well, we'll be talking about even more of their stuff in the coming videos. For now, using our code GAMEMASTERSGUIDE will get you an extended 30-day trial on any plan. So if you decide to subscribe, whatever you pick, our plan will add an extra free month on top of that. Anyways, thanks for tagging along, and that little intro piece at the end I was talking about, all the extra noises and sound effects will be using the free assets from Describe. So if you're not sure if you'll like it, you can test things out using the free stuff offered to anyone. Back to Genshin though, the next region we have is Inazuma, the Land of Eternity and Electro, or Lightning. It is an archipelago isolated from the rest of Teyvat. The only way to get there is travel by sea, and for a while its borders were closed off to outsiders, as well as the difficulty to navigate the seas leading to it. This area embodies Japanese cultures, and different elevations allow for sheer cliffs and mountainous areas, while others brush close or below sea level, creating many beaches and water-filled areas. A grand shrine sits atop of an incredibly hard-to-ascend mountain, though somehow that doesn't stop children and elders from traversing it. It watches over the namesake city, where the shogunate lives and rules from. Being the Land of Eternity, the philosophy should be pretty simple to apply. Things that will stand the test of time, ideals that will persist, etc. However, this might be the hardest to attribute to why visions are given. Raiden Shogun herself is mostly sealed away in her own separate dimension without a body, and operates mentally through a Shogun puppet she created that is pretty much autonomous. She can sort of possess it, and nothing suggests she couldn't do that full time, but she doesn't really like people and is closed off from how people feel and act. She's getting better, but her sister was more understanding of humans and nature, and she mostly lived by the sword. The puppet is even more out of touch and was specifically programmed with a specific no-nonsense attitude, though it has been changed slightly, even it still mostly follows the instructions to the letter without much interpretation to be had. So what exactly qualifies here for a vision? Lisa just was like, gee, I wish I had a vision, and presto. Perhaps because she's the smartest to ever come from the academia? Fischl is stuck in a permanent cosplay, so maybe emulating and keeping the book that she bases herself off of alive counts? Beto at least fought a giant ocean creature, so that's at least a sea shanty that's being sung forever. Ketching being the youngest Yuhang, keeping the ideals of Leeway alive after Rex Lapis? It really feels subjective on what qualifies, because it's hard to tell what ideals or instances will survive past the current time frame. I think the best way we can look at it is someone continuing a legacy or leaving some sort of mark on history. There are multiple factions in Inazuma, but outside of the Grand Narukami Shrine, the other three make up the larger Tri-Commission, which acts as a sort of overall government in charge of Inazuma. The three branches are the Tenryo Commission, which is essentially the policing force responsible for security and military affairs, the Kanjo Commission, which is responsible for finances and pretty much border control and customs, and the Yashiro Commission, which is responsible for festivals, shrines, and other cultural events. Normally they would seem to be an outlier, but in the Land of Eternity, keeping these traditions alive makes them just as important and equal in power to the other commissions. The Grand Narukami Shrine is run by Lady Guji, a kitsune familiar of the Shogun and also the owner of the Yae publishing house. Being a kitsune, she often plays elaborate pranks of people for her own amusement and has a fascination with all kinds of written stories, and a variety of duties making sure shrines are clear of corruption and that other yokai get proper appreciation. There are not many yokai left, and players in Inazuma will more likely run into Yae given how many things she has applied herself to. If you decide to do part of your campaign here, finding or honoring old yokai, helping keep shrines presentable or uncorrupted, or even just basic shopping inside of Inazuma, Yae is going to have to be involved in some way. Next up we have Sumaru, the land of wisdom and dendro, or plants? Nature? It took till this patch in 3.0 for dendro characters to even exist. This area is almost exclusively deep rainforests to the east and large looming deserts to the west. Known for its academia, there are many researchers and scholars studying any number of things. Many of the ruins lay in the deserts, while the rainforests hold many small villagers and research areas, as well as the namesake city built in and around a giant tree. Things get a bit complicated with Sumaru's Archon, in that she sacrificed herself to fend off essentially a curse affecting her land, but she didn't die, she was sort of reincarnated and then imprisoned for a long while till the Traveler showed up. She's very kind and very wise, though she still knows there are plenty of things to learn. What gives a dendro vision is sort of hard to determine. Characters like Tainari are very astute, the same with Al-Aetham. They are smart and have strong convictions. Others like Kole are a bit more abstract, but it could be due to their continued kindness and compassion despite previous trauma or experiences. A dendro vision should be about some sort of intelligence, but also being wise about how you use your power to approach people. There really are only two factions here. The aforementioned Academia is one, made up of 6 inner factions depending on the field of study and everything else. Often scholars and researchers will need help gathering supplies or conducting experiments, so a traveling party in Sumaru should expect to be doing any numbers of things from escorting to supply runs to participating in random experiments. The other big faction are the Ermites, who are a mercenary group who also fill in the role for protection and other things. A group called the Corps of 30 acts as guards for Sumaru City, and a lot of other factions have an open partnership with the Adventurers Guild. The next area is Fontaine, the land of justice and hydro, and is a large elevated continental plate that makes the region of mostly water far higher than most other nations. The land is known for its court system, being a land of justice, but also the massive amount of technological advancements that have been made and featured around the various areas. This area mimics a bit of French culture, and has a bit of steampunk vibe going on. The Archon, well, things get a bit complicated. Remember, I did just do this section along with Natland to catch up, though I believe the dynamics of everything don't actually change that much. As I mentioned in the intro, even though Fontaine is the land of justice, I think other factors come into play here, like the show of it all. Barbara being an idol and Nilou being a dancer definitely support this concept. I'll preface again that everything I say is an opinion and speculation, and your ideas and interpretations might make more sense, so feel free to correct me or add in your own in the comments. There are a few factions in Fontaine, though they are mostly just different parts of the justice system. They have the Maison Gardiennage, which is just the law enforcement section, and include the operation of the mechanical units that patrol. There is also an entire prison system that has its own rules and regulations, and is a lot less strict than you'd expect a prison to be. There's a research group called the Fontaine Research Institute, and their primary function was to find solutions to the prophesized Great Flood that would wipe out all of Fontaine. Any mechanical invention came as a result of the Research Institute. The other group, which really shouldn't be that important, but carries some weight and prestige, is the Spina de Rosula, a group created to help the people of Fontaine and investigate incidents that the guards or law would have difficulty investigating. Not quite a vigilante group, but a civil police force type thing, the Spina de Rosula is only as great as the people that support it, being entirely funded by donations. Both of its leaders have been known to be kind and compassionate people, especially when taking up tasks that law enforcement could no longer pursue. There is honestly a lot to do in Fontaine. Sumaru was really large, but Fontaine has so many different areas and groups that allow many different perspectives throughout the nation. Helping with research, pursuing criminals, doing stuff with the newspaper The Steambird, which is read all around Tevat, there are many opportunities to keep even a campaign set in just Fontaine incredibly interesting. There's even the ability to breathe underwater, so underwater fights and encounters could be incredibly plausible. Natland is the land of war and pyro, though they don't fight among themselves but have a long-standing battle with the Abyss. There are large valleys and gorges, lands of hot springs and volcanoes, and a number of tribes that inhabit the qualities of the lands around them. Natland's natives mostly do not leave the nation, remaining there and never venturing outside their borders, for a reason that was explained in the game, and becoming mostly obsolete by the time the traveler finishes. The tribes all work together and have their own set of practices and beliefs. A native of Natland also has a connection to the wildlife, specifically beasts called saurians. There are a number of different species that work in tandem with the different tribes and even fight beside and are honored just like any other warrior. The Archon is once again kind of confusing. Anyone in Natland can be the Archon, and they have had competitions where the strongest among them was chosen to be so. The current Archon, Mawika, did such a thing only a few years ago, but turns out she was also a former Archon and did some stuff to be around at the culmination of Natland's biggest moment. The themes for Natland could be more closely related to duty, but I also believe determination, as I mentioned in the intro with Bennett. Natland holds their nation dear and will do anything to keep going and keep persevering through each fight. Even if they pass on, their memories and talents can be passed on through their names to future generations, and the soul of Natland never really dies in this way. There really aren't factions in Natland, if you don't count each tribe as its own faction. They have their own customs and beliefs, but so many people of Natland work with each other that other than certain practices, they don't really operate independently. Each tribe is equal and part of Natland as a whole, and there doesn't even seem to be that much any animosity between the groups. Any time spent here should be helping the different tribes and getting in touch with the animals, but also some of the weirder energies and vehicular inventions that make this nation unique. Lastly, we have Schnezaya, the land of cold? The people are cold, land is an Arctic abyss, and the nation is seen as an isolated or independent from everything else. Despite this, Schnezaya is still considered to be the most technologically advanced, even over Fontaine, and has the strongest military might thanks to the Fatui. Even the Adventurers Guild originates from here, though why it doesn't face the same scrutiny as everything else, no one's really sure. This is also the only area left in the game that we know about that hasn't been revealed or playable, so things can always change. Doing any part of a campaign here definitely leaves everything up to you, the DM. Since not a whole lot has been revealed, you can map the whole region and anything else in it like you would any other campaign. When I ran my campaign, I chose to do it in Sumaru, obviously before the 3.0 update, and it was great coming up with everything based off the small information we knew at the time. So if you don't want to have to try and recreate everything, this might be the best way for you to go, though there's nothing stopping you from doing that with any of the other nations and doing your own continuity for things. That is a very vague, if not long-winded explanation for each nation and what's important. So how do we put all that together? Well, as always, we need to figure out if we're going to just be staying in one place or moving across each nation eventually. Honestly, there's plenty to do, so it's up to you how much you want to plan, and if your players can keep their interest if they are stuck in one nation. This time around, I have a particular idea that would take the party around each nation, but probably never being anywhere too long, so let's start diving into that. So who are we? What's our party's relevance to the campaign? I'm going to be using the same idea I used for my previous Genshin campaign, and take inspiration from the Bracers Guild from the Trails series, specifically the one that introduced me, Trails in the Sky. Now the Bracers are actually very similar to the Adventurers Guild in that they accept all kinds of requests to take care of monsters, escort people, etc. You have to register with your branch ahead of time, but the difference is that the braces are kind of more important than just your everyday adventurer guild member. Braces are ranked, and the higher your letter grade, the stronger you are, but also the more missions you've done and helped. The Bracers Guild also has some political and military sway in Trails in the Sky, and that's what we want to try and emulate here. So this party is a newly established branch of the Adventurers Guild. Obviously, each nation has its own form of protection and law enforcement, but what we want to do is use the Bracers to be a faction to turn to deal with international problems, or to be able to act before the paperwork clears for a nation to get properly involved. This works well because, as we've already mentioned, there's already an Adventurers Guild section in each nation, and you have to register in that nation before you can take quests on, exactly like the Bracers Guild. If you want to switch branches, you have to fill out some paperwork and then you are transferred to that branch. So this group of adventurers are going to be started in Monstat, most likely the first group to really suggest this new branch idea, and the nation that has the most freedom and kind of the least trouble. So as a new bracer, or whatever you want to name this particular faction of the adventurers group, this group will be going out to take on harder quests that would require a group as opposed to one person, and being sort of a licensed mercenary group with a bit more clout that would usually come with that association. Now, doing small quests and fighting monsters is fun and all, and we could certainly have fun throwing other bigger monsters in, think the Gigantos from Tales of Vesperia, or maybe some of the Monster Hunter monsters from one of our upcoming videos, but that wouldn't be the most exciting campaign without an overarching story. So what else can we do to spice this up? Well, it's always great to have a powerful faction to go against, and we already have one of the cooler factions in this game, the Fatui. But if you're like me, you want a bit more creativity than just recycling existing characters. I try not to use too many people that exist and to make things my own. So how do we do the Fatui but not the Harbingers? Well, that's easy. They're doing the same thing we are. There are already many different subdivisions of the Fatui trying to find ways to do things for the Tsaritsa. So while the Harbingers are out looking for the no-seas, our group is going to be looking for powerful artifacts and such, and we're going to have our own group of Supervasses. Now we're only doing 2 here, but we've built them out for you with a couple of different phases. Let me introduce you to Raiden-san and Mitch. Now Raiden-san is another one of the Shogun's puppets that was discarded and recovered by the Fatui. She really should have been more careful. This Raiden has an issue with emotions as well, and is looking for a way to maim or torture and let off some steam. Much like Scaramouche and using the Gnosis as a power source, Raiden-san is using delusions and procured visions to try and power herself further and further, which indeed makes her more powerful but also more unstable. Mitch is a fully aware mid-churl who's retained his humanity, well, as far as the consciousness does. Looking into powerful artifacts, hopes that he could find a way to return to his human form, or perhaps finally reach an end. He is often very polite, but can be ferocious if you push his buttons or question his humanity. Those are only 2 of the handful of the group, and I encourage you to make your own Harbinger-esque characters that'll make the campaign really interesting, because cool and memorable villains really make players get invested in the game. And of course, why have they crossed our Bracer-inspired party? Now your party isn't specifically going to be looking for powerful artifacts, but maybe they come across them as they change areas around them with dangerous effects. But that's the thing with crazy random happenstance. Your party is going to stumble across something that they want. So what is that? Why, it's the fallen constellation of Greater Lord Lukadavada. Now she's supposed to have written herself out of existence, but more specifically Irminsul, which is like the world record of all of Tevat. But nothing says she can't exist outside of Irminsul, much like the Traveler. So we're going to have pieces of her power falling throughout the land as this specialized Fatui group tries to take the pieces out of your hands, and you can have one of the best characters help guide you along your path. What happens when you get all the pieces? Well, for your group, maybe they'll get certain buffs as a party for each piece, but the Fatui are probably going to try to use them like the Dragon Balls and get a wish. What could they possibly wish for? Well, that depends on the Tsaritsa, but she also says that each member of the Fatui can put their own needs first if they so choose. So maybe one of these members is going to wish for something unsavory. What better reason than to stop them from collecting them, right? And that's pretty much the basics for my idea. A long-winded explanation of the land for those who don't know it, a bit more for those who just need a basis, and just some general things to think about as you plan. As always, I'll leave a little opening synopsis, but thanks for bearing with all this, and I'm excited to see how the game's story ends, but also how you would plan this out. The party had a handful of missions under their belt to really get to know each other. Everything was a bit trial and error, and while people had recognized that the Adventurers Guild had a new group that was supposed to be more special and carry some authority, that was mostly just in words, and the public really didn't have any reason to believe in them, other than hoping that they would have as much as any other adventurer. Still, the party had taken care of some monsters, filled some special requests, and at least in Monstat, people were beginning to warm up to the idea, as any group to take more work from an overworked acting grandmaster was earning bonus points in their books. This current mission was a bit more out of the ordinary. Some sort of meteorite or something seemed to have fallen about halfway up Dragonspine, and the smoke could be seen all the way in Leeway. The knights could be sent out, but this seemed as good a time as any to use this new Bracer faction to take care of a problem, and keep the already hardworking knights closer to home. Dragonspine was a very cold mountain, and extra precautions had to be taken. A lot of the creatures and such up there had adjusted, so the party had to make sure they wouldn't be caught underprepared. Luckily, they had a great guide. His name was Kago, short for something much longer, though he kept it simple. He was quite a large man in himself, though man might not be the most apt to describe him since he was an Oni. Large and foreboding, he had a deep, almost ebony-like skin and one large horn on the right side that went up and curved out at an awkward angle. There was no sign of a second horn. He was quite kind and compassionate, even to go so far as to say boisterous, and was able to diffuse the tension that often came with his larger size. He was well-traveled, and he currently sat as the new Bracer's admin of sorts, and who better than an Oni who had seemed to have been everywhere.
Now be careful. It's been a pretty quiet journey so far, and that may be due to the impact of whatever that was coming down. Most creatures aren't too curious on something that loud and fast, so hopefully we can get in and look around without much hassle. Just when you feel safe is when the enemy is most likely to strike.
The party nodded as they pressed on, the cold still finding ways to cut through their garments almost seemingly straight into their very souls. The plume of smoke was closer now, and they were beginning to come across the impact point. As they reached the crest of the crater, their eyes were suddenly accosted with a bright, otherworldly light. Shielding them a bit, but still pressing on, they found the source of the impact, though the object was pretty small in size, seemingly able to fit in one's hand. It was almost like a chunk of the moon, or a literal hand-sized star. The party approached, and probably against better judgment, someone's hand reached out to touch it. Suddenly, everything went white, and it was hard to tell where they were or what was happening. In their vision appeared a woman dressed in white robes, with pointed ears and a floor-length white hair that seemed to fade into a mint green. Greetings, adventurers of Teyvat. What you hear may be shocking to you, but I assure you it's the truth. The object you now possess is part of a constellation of a former Archon. Who I am is not important, as history has been rewritten to erase any existence of me. However, this power exists outside of Teyvat itself. Every person has their own constellation that exists as proof of their existence in the stars, and these constellations contain thoughts and feelings, memories, and sometimes great power manifested from that individual's life. Though I may no longer exist in this land, these fragments contain everything I mentioned before, and I worry what will happen should these memories and fragments fall into the wrong hands. History can be rewritten once more, and I must ask you for your help for the sake of all Teyvat. Find the other fragments, protect them, make sure they are not abused or misused, and please, be careful. There's so much I wish to tell you, but this piece is only one fraction of me. The more you have, the more complete I become, for you or anyone else who gathers them. There isn't much time to contemplate the words of the strange being, nary a moment to even ask a question or consider that this isn't some strange dream or hallucination, as the party blinks and once again finds themselves in the cold.
I take it everyone saw that.
Kago simply says, meeting the eyes of the party. Someone goes to hold up the glowing rock to take another look, but suddenly their hand is empty. In confusion, the party looks around, only to spot a well-dressed and masked man.
Oh, I'm sorry, but the simple and outstanding piece of history is far wasted on the likes of you. True beauty should be admired by the beautiful, no?
The man bows deeply before realigning himself.
Pleased to meet you. My name shall remain a mystery a bit longer, though for now you may call me the Phantom. I'm sorry, but this little thing is now property of the Fatui, and I shall be absconding with it. Perhaps we shall meet again and be able to discuss the nature of true beauty.
I look forward to hearing your response. With a literal splash of water, the man disappears with the object they only held for a few seconds. As the cold begins to seep in, and the wind begins to whistle in their ears, the silence of the party eggs the question of, was this even all real? The crater, now smoke-free, is the only proof that what they came for ever existed, as the man came and went in a flash. The party looks around at one another, and though they technically succeeded in their mission to find out what happened, they were left at a bit of a loss, and wondering if they hadn't failed to stop the first step in a much larger plan. And that's all I have for you. Apologies for my bad voices, but honestly I find this good practice. Hopefully these are fun and interesting for you all, and as always, thank you to our sponsors and all the patrons. We'll have our vision system up on Patreon if you want to take a look at it, and we'll also have the sheets for Rain and San and Mitch. Make sure to leave a comment, whatever you want. Every bit helps, and it's the only way for us to grow and by default bring you more content. But that's it for me. I'm Metal Atlas, and I'll see you for the next campaign.